platforms here. I'm waiting to make sure we are live on all platforms, and then we'll get to speaking about the major topic that I want to talk about for today's stream. I haven't done one of these novel streams in a very long time. Originally, I was doing a novel stream and my podcast every week. And honestly, I dropped the novel stream because I wasn't really updating very much about it, and then I just had to take something off as I tried to figure out how to correctly balance my schedule and how and all of that worked. Because time management is a very big deal. But I decided I was just going to bring it back for this stream. And the main reason I'm doing this stream is to test the new changes I made to my OBS and audio and all these other things. So I want to make sure everything still sounds good and I'm able to play some of the tricks. And I added some extensions also to the breakdown. And as you can see on my Twitch, and that's why okay, repeat. The main reason I'm doing this stream is to one update you on what I've done, which is very minimal because I had to take something off, and the second was to test my modifications I made to Twitch. I added several what they call extensions that allow me to see who follows and who's chatting better and just more engagement with the overall audience. So I wanted to make sure that all of those are working very well and very fine, and we can go from there. And it looks like we are all good on all platforms, so we'll go ahead and kind of get into the main discussion. And thank you, David Blaine, for the follow. I know that we were talking on Discord because we plan to do a Tuesday live stream of the election. And that is also why I wanted to do this testing for this stream because I want to make sure everything works and goes smooth for Tuesday, which is really the main event of doing so. But I do think I'm going to be doing a novel stream at least once a month because I do like to do them and I do want to work on my novel more because it is a project that I'm still passionate about and I still want to work on. But I had to take something off and it ended up being that. But I think if I make it once a month, I still will feel obligated to get something done. It'll still be a project that I like to do and want to have fun with, and I want to change, and I want to see progress towards without feeling like each week that I didn't do that much or didn't do enough. And so I decided that I'm probably going to have a novel stream at least once a month and sometimes once a week just to hold me accountable still. But I do still want to continue doing so. But those who are maybe new to this novel stream idea or to this podcast or whatever else, essentially in high school I was making a short story that had to be 10 pages. It had to be a horror story. It had to be something that was scary. It didn't necessarily have to be like fully graphic or have blood or mystical like magic. It could be anything. The teacher just wanted it to have some sort of horror element. And if you weren't necessarily a fan of horror, you could more kind of stretch the limits with making it more of like a fantasy magic deal. So they had those elements along with the assignment. But long story short, the major assignment was this 10-page story that I had to make. And I decided that I was going to make a horror story uh, talking about the method of discovering about medieval times. And once I decided upon medieval times, I then had to pick out how I wanted the story necessarily to happen. And I'll give a summary about that. But the whole thing started as really a short story of this novel. And then I decided, you know what, I like this idea, and I think that I'm going to write this story as a novel or a much longer version. Now I don't know if I necessarily have enough details, or this is really my first attempt at making a novel. So I don't know if it's going to end up being like 200, 300, 400, plus pages or whatever else. So I had to take that into account. But long story short, that's my ultimate goal. And I do see Jimmy on YouTube there, and he says you're back home, and he says my school said that spring semester is going to be all online. Yeah, I'm back home for the election because, long story short, I was trying to change the address to vote at my school because they had early voting um, for the school. And I might have not even done early voting because really I'm not much of a fan of it, but that's just more personal preference than anything political. So there's not that much going on there as far as that goes. But long story short, I waited too long to try to change my address to the college where I'm at now. So I kind of got stuck. So I either was going to not vote or have to come home to cast my vote. So I decided I was just going to come home to cast my vote. And also a big component or a big idea that I want to discuss real briefly, since we're talking about the election stream. I'm going to be doing it on Tuesday, probably starting at either 4 or 5, maybe 3 at the earliest, and go to wherever long I can. And I'm not sure how long I'm going to be able to last, but knowing the election, we'll have something to talk about, so it could be a very long time. And since Jimmy's there, make sure you check your Discord there, Jimmy, because I was trying to contact you about if you wanted to be a part of the Tuesday stream. If you do, you can go ahead and just message me there on Discord, and we can work out a time. Because I know you wanted to be a part of my YouTube channel and now Twitch and D Live. On several platforms now, but I know you wanted to be a part of it. So if you're still interested in that and you're still interested in the election and you want to, I'll be open to having you on as part of that stream on Tuesday. So I don't know if, like I said, I don't know if you're interested, but I'm definitely open to that idea. And then we can maybe work on a independent video on another topic whenever I'm back in town again. Because I do think talking about something not always political is a good idea too. Like when I made that Star Wars video and we talked about before. So again, I'm opening you to that idea. You don't have to, but if you want to, I'll definitely have you as a part of the podcast or part of the channels here. Now, going back to the book real briefly here, or going back to the book. So I had to discover what I necessarily wanted to do, and then when I decided that I was going to do this story, what I was going to do an expansion off of these 10 pages that I originally wrote. I decided that the best way for me to do this was one of two ideas. So my first stream, if you want to listen to that, is where I've read those 10 and a half pages that I originally wrote. And then my second stream and third, I believe, I started to discuss my ideas and what I wanted to do from that stream. And I decided that throughout those streams that I was going to split my first chapter into two ideas. My first idea was keeping those 10 and a half pages that I wrote as a horror story the same. So they wouldn't be changed, they wouldn't have anything different to them, and it would be the prologue of the story. And really set up this character as Catherine really well. My second idea was keeping those 10 and a half pages, changing them a little bit, and expanding the 10 and a half pages to the first chapter of the story. So basically, the first idea is creating a whole new chapter one, and the second idea is basically treating the 10 and a half pages I've wrote or written already so far as part of the first chapter. And I'll give a very quick summary of my 10 and a half pages, and just in case if you are not interested in checking out those first streams where I read all of those stories out. So basically, the setting, like I said before, is in medieval times with Sir Felix and several other parts. And he went around the story, went around the idea, and started to discover that part of his camps were in battles. And these battles made it very hard for them to continue on. Because basically, the setting of this story is after the fall of the Roman Empire. And I don't know if that makes a total sense the way I just explained it there, so I'll try it again here because I realize I don't really make too much sense. But basically, I wanted to make sure that the idea and what I wanted to discuss was fully going off of this horror story element. So that was the main focus of the story. So I had the main character of the story follow his boss dude, the knight, and the knight ended up getting killed, and he ended up getting shot in the shoulder and passed out and woke up in a mysterious camp that he didn't necessarily know where it was located. And this character called Catherine was more of a caretaker, yet he didn't really know what to think about Catherine so much. So he then decided that he was going to try to figure out exactly where he was. And long story short, one of the night characters of that village or castle he found himself in came in and said, I know you're hiding somebody and you're going to tell me. And long story short on that, she didn't tell him, so she got taken out, ended up getting supposedly beaten off screen, so to speak, or off script, and came back and killed this main character that we got to know in the prologue very briefly. So that is kind of how the first uh, prologue of this story went along. And then I decided from there that I was going to start the first chapter off from a normal type of setting for a chapter. So I'm not sure if that makes a whole lot of sense, so I'll explain it. This is really the best way I think I can explain it. Basically, if I use this first idea as my main idea, this first chapter is going to start off like a normal book chapter would. So the prologue essentially sets you up for the story and sets you up for what you should sort of expect with the story. In the first chapter, then is the first part of the story you're obviously reading. Some people do read the prologue first, but really you get your viewers, your readers hooked on the first chapter. But I decided I wanted to start the chapter off from the prologue at this mysterious empire. So one of the big things about this was in my mind if I should name this empire or keep the empire's name unknown through the first part of the story. And I decided, at least as of now, that I'm wanting to name the empire to my story in this first chapter. So, taking that into account, I came up with a few names that I'm not necessarily fully confident in using, but as I've said many times on this stream, I'm not really so interested in making a perfect chapter right off the bat. Because many people, especially me, I will tend to get bogged down on details in wanting to make a perfect or at least a better or good chapter the first time around and get dragged down too much on details, so much so that I end up uh, prolonging the effort of writing this first chapter so much that it never gets done because I'm looking for details before I really should. And it is something that is very important. And Jimmy says here before I forget to read it, I wish I could, but I am doing two major projects. Present you could have aftermath video discussing the results of the election. Okay, yeah, I could definitely do a aftermath of the election. I'm not sure if we're going to know the actual election results on the first day after or even election day itself. It could be even weeks delay according to how much mail-in ballots haven't been counted. The whole mail-in ballot process could prolong. I don't know, as I already said, I don't know how long it could prolong. So it is a interesting idea as far as mail-in ballots go. But anyway, long story short, I'll definitely be willing to discuss it with you as far as the results of the election for sure. So I didn't know exactly what I wanted to name this empire, and as I said, and I think as of now I'm going to name it. And I didn't want to get bogged down too much in details because I would never end up finishing the story. So taking all that into account, that is why you see if you're listening to it or listening to if you're watching it live here, you'll see letters in red or words in red. And those red letters are things I am wanting to change. A lot of times I will start a sentence with the or then or something as a usual first-hand word. And I'll also use a lot of the same transitions. So I'm wanting to make sure I don't fall into the trap of using the same starting word or the same transitions each and every sentence. And that is important. So that is why I just simply marked it in red and said, here is better option, or here is a word I want to change, or here is a extra word I might want to add to make the story make more sense, blah blah blah. You get the point. So I think the best place to start as far as this goes and to get my mind back really into what I have on the screen here so far is to discuss the first chapter parts I've written so far, or the first couple paragraphs I've written. So I'm going to go ahead and read those out loud, and then we'll get into my notes on what I want to continue with, and then we'll get into some few other concepts. I'm not sure how long this stream is going to go for, but again, I just wanted to make sure to test this Twitch. And Jimmy, I don't know if you have Twitch. If you do, my Twitch is The Breakdown with WB, and I would appreciate if you follow me on Twitch as well, because I am wanting to test some of the extensions and make sure that they do work. And one of those extensions is where it shows you if someone has followed on your screen or on your chat messages. But if you don't have Twitch, that's no big deal. I appreciate you subscribing on YouTube anyway. So I'll go ahead and read here. And so far, the working first chapter title I have is 375 AD, The Darkness Continues. The summer sunrise hits the northwest castle wall, casting an ominous shadow even the greatest enemy would be afraid of. The poor and the wise were the only ones awake, although they lived very different lives. The village beyond the castle walls never knew the time of the day. As the sun grows to its majestic beauty, glowing into the just finest hues of reds, oranges, and yellows, Sir Jester, along with the rest of the royalty within the castle walls, never knew this light as a wakeable force. The towering, thick ashlar wall stood so high a giant couldn't even peer over it. Walls that stood for hundreds of years as the great empire of, and have the Greek letters, but ocean gods' presence. As any legendary castle that has stood the test of time, there were several layers among its defense. There were 3 castle wall layers. The first, a smaller stone wall, serving as the first point of defense. The second wall is a large wall with several lookout towers with archery towers. Then lastly, the third wall, just before the main castle, protecting the important parts of the keep. This wasn't the case for all villages outside the looking eyes upon the hill. The houses were all slightly different as they were built with the hands of the owner. Although each owner was different, the material was still the same, poor mud and dry grasses, therefore causing an uncomfortable unity. The John Smith household also had dry mud and grasses. The house in particular was built with layers upon layers of the west mud, taking many days to dry. I think that's supposed to be best mud. I'm going to go ahead and change that before I forget. The house in particular was built with layers upon layers of the best mud, taking many days to dry. One day, parts of the house could see cracks as the mud decided the results and time of the effort. The John Smith household focused on farming, with the oldest house of the family of the peasant folk. This was because many generations expanded on the house through knowledge and skilled labor. The house was built with 3 different types of mud, as the first acted as a binder, the second as a crack resistor, and the final as a smooth holder. The outside layer was covered in a dry grass as every other household. The difference with the John Smith house was the grass layering itself. The grass was layered in rows going downward and across the building itself like a diagonal lashing. The layers of mud of the John Smith household were so well constructed compared to the rest of the village. The Smith household, although it was well kept, still had its broken parts. These parts would bother John Smith, as he was the caretaker not only of his family, but of the whole village. His attention to detail was admired by the whole village, as he demanded the best from everyone. Some would call John Smith the king of the fisher folk, and he would speak with the fish. Either way, he would also come back with enough fish to live well on. John Smith taught his older son Leo the tricks of the trade as fisherman and wish whisperer. John Smith and Leo Smith looked strikingly similar even for a dad and son. The striking black, thick, curly yet short hair stood out. They also seemed to have blackish brown eyes with the with slight hints of green depending on the time of day. The most notable difference can be seen in the light or darkness. The innocent claimed Leo's hand, the incident claimed Leo's hand and casted a dark shadow only the sea knew to be true. All the village knew were Leo's screams as the waves rowed him closer to the land, and Leo never said a word, never said, never said a word, never said a word. See, some errors here. Never said a word about what happened. The village gave Leo an underground nickname only whispered. Isabel, the daughter of the Smith household, a put together yet shy, only speaking in the softest of tones. So that is all I have for this first chapter so far, and where I left off on as far as the last stream on this novel series goes. But going back real quickly and discussing some of those red parts. So you see this red here is on farming because later on I mentioned a fishing accident. And you can't really have fishing and farming in the medieval times. Now, yes, fishing and farming did exist and did have separate components as far as that goes. Basically, you did have people who farmed, and you also had people that fished. But having the same family do both as their trade is rather bizarre. Even nowadays, you don't necessarily have someone that's a plumber and a carpenter at the same time. So it doesn't really make that much of sense. So I think I have to go with one of the two ways as far as it goes to keep the story more consistent. And later on, I mentioned about the fishing incident, and I haven't came up with one because I don't want to steal too much ideas from, let's say, Game of Thrones or any other fantasy novel, medieval setting type of book where you had like Tyrion with the cut across his eye or the forehead or the missing nose, those common traits. So I was thinking of something like a scar on his hand or a major cut across some sort of body part. And yes, it's a similar idea, or a fish hook stuck inside a knuckle or something where you couldn't necessarily get it out, but something relating to that, where it was a physical attribute that Leo had, but isn't really copying other stories or other ideas from that attribute. And then I also mentioned here, as you can see in red, with the crack resistor. Now, the reason I kind of have that in red is I don't know if a crack resistor terminology makes the best sense, but that's kind of what I have so far for that one. And then as you see here, I say think of one, because again, I don't necessarily know the accident I want to go with yet. And secondly, I don't know the nickname for the accident I don't know of yet. So I kind of have to think of what accident I want to go with and then go from there. Daily Blend says, reloaded your stream a few times and I think you're having some sound issues. I can't really hear you. Are you monitoring your chat? Yeah, I'm monitoring it. I know that I'm not sure about the sound goes. Yeah, I see that Ron's saying the same thing there on YouTube. Let me make sure we're all good on OBS real quick here. Let's see. We will set up settings. We got this. Have to capture. I think I figured this out.
It may be better now. I don't know if it was picking up the mic volume. Let's see if that fixes the issue on as of sound goes. We'll see if the comments probably let me know real quick. I don't know why it was doing that. Okay, yeah, okay, you can hear me now. Yeah, OBS must have changed the sound setting from when I went to Discord to regular sound. I don't know if that makes much sense, but See, Discord does very strange things. It wants me to change my audios to several different components, like when I have my headphones, because I have my headphones plugged in. I'm not have them on yet because I'm not listening to videos yet. I'm gonna be doing that later on, but they want to change the audios to very weird things. Like, you don't want your mic, you don't want your headset that doesn't even have like a mic ability to be your mic. And it keeps wanting to do that. So I made sure I had everything good there on test this morning, but OBS must have still had those sort of settings down inside there. And Daily Blend says, great sound. You were next to nothing, just chompy. And then it says, mine does the same thing, and I have to change them back all the time. It is a pain. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I think it is between Discord and that. So I apologize for the audio issues. I don't know if y'all could hear the story on what I read. If not, I can probably go ahead and read it again just so you can kind of hear the first chapter, because I don't want it to be all super choppy. On that goes. But as I was kind of saying real briefly, I'll make a very quick summary, and I don't really want to say the same 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever again. But I made a very short 10-page story in high school, and I decided that I was going to continue this story and make it more of like a low fantasy novel type of series. And I decided that I was going to have two ideas, and my first idea is keeping the 10.5 pages I wrote as the prologue the same, and then from the 10.5 page prologue that I wrote, I was going to start my chapter as any chapter would start. Basically, it would be a whole new thing, but still relates to the prologue. So I decided that I was going to start my first chapter as part of the empire that we don't know the name to of in the prologue. And in the first chapter, I decided I was going to name this new empire that I created in the first chapter. So a big debate that I've been having between myself is naming of the empire. Right now, as of the prologue and as of the chapter, I don't have a name for the empire yet. I have a working name, but I'm not 100% sure exactly what I want to do as far as that goes. If I decide to name the empire, I think the first chapter may make more sense as far as word building goes, because keeping the empire unnamed could lead to several problems as I try to continue this story if I don't have very good planning for each part of the story or for each component that the story builds on. I am not an avid writer. Writing has been something that I've struggled with a lot, and this is partly why I want to make this story. I'm not somebody that writing comes very easily with, but it's still something that I want to challenge myself with and continue my activity of writing, because I used to hate writing, but now writing's not as much of a bigger deal to me as it was in the past. And sometimes I even enjoy writing, especially a story like this, which is kind of a passion project. So keeping the empire unnamed and me not having that much writing experience to trying to build novels or to try to build word building through short stories or any other writing practice, I think is going to be very challenging to keep every line of the story and every progression of the story to make sense. So I think that it would be smart to actually name this empire in the first chapter of my story. Now, what I want to name it is something I'm not 100% sure about. Right now, I kind of want to do a name based off of Greek or the Roman alphabet or Roman names, like Ocean God or something relating to that. And Ocean God is the working title of the empire name I have so far. Excuse me. But I don't know if I necessarily want to use Ocean God as my name for the empire, because it's just kind of a little bit cheesy to me. So I don't think I'm going to use Ocean God, but I still think that I am going to name the empire. But it's still something I think about a lot when it comes to this story. And then I also think I need to add a little bit more details as to explaining the castle, because I kind of want a big part of the story to be super detailed explaining of this castle. I want to feel like I have placed you on this castle, or I placed you in Google Maps and you're using Street View and looking around all of the castle. You know what I mean? I want a full detailed perspective to where you can read the description and come up with an image in your mind as to what the castle looks like. And obviously when you read a book and you're not listening or watching it on TV, you'll get a basic image of what you think the castle looks like in your mind, but not fully know exactly what the castle looks like. And then the people who read this description and decide to make it into a TV show or movie like Game of Thrones, then show you what the castle looks like. And for a lot of people, once they physically see the castle being shown on this TV show or this movie, then decide that they like that representation of what a castle is and start to build that perspective of the castle into their mind when they think of that castle when they read the Game of Thrones. But obviously I don't have that privilege of showing you what this castle looks like on TV or on a movie. But I still think I want to give a really detailed perspective as to what the castle looks like, to the point where you can envision it yourself. And that is a very important part to writing, because the classic phrase you hear all the time when you want to write a story, or you're writing in high school or college, or creative writing in elementary or whatever else, is to show and tell. And that is the perspective of rather saying what your heroes are doing, like basically I think the best part of how to explain show and tell is basically, instead of making a whole 2-paragraph long description of what the hero is doing, such as John, there's a big war. Oh no, we need to get over there. There's been this many people dead. Instead of saying that, the better approach is to simply show that is happening. So instead of saying a 2-paragraph long description on everything when it relates to that, instead of saying, oh no, there's a war, 300 people are now dead, it is to go into the war and show that a war is happening and how many people have died. It is a very basic concept as far as storytelling goes. And there are plenty better examples that I could probably come up with once I finish the stream and think about it, because that's how that works, are just examples on YouTube or any sort of blog site on Google or whatever else. But that is kind of the basic concept as far as story elements on show and tell go. Another big thing about storytelling and where I want to put my perspective of the story was I ended it with Leo having a scar of some sort, and I've explained that. I'm not 100% sure what I want to go with yet, but then I wanted to describe the John Smith household family in better description. So I want to explain the daughter and the mother of the household. And I'm debating if I want to also have a brother. I have this program, and I'm going to later on in this stream show you some videos of this program I have on YouTube about this program called Campfire. And Campfire helps you with word building and helps you with plot progression and keeping all your characters in line and what attributes they have, who they're connected with, and all these other necessary parts to writing that make a story flow and sound better. So when it comes to that, I'm going to show this Campfire program in a different stream. I don't have it up now, so I don't necessarily want to pull it up on this stream necessarily. But this YouTuber for this Campfire program has several very good videos about explaining the simple concepts that I've listened to, and I also want to share on this stream and just think about it a little bit more when it comes to story progression and such. But anyway, long story short, the reason I mentioned Campfire was I have all of these characters in the Campfire program and who they're briefly connected with so far in this story, either between the prologue and the first chapter. And keeping these characters in mind, who they're connected with, why they're important, and the progression as far as story development goes with each character is very important. In other words, if you have a character that you say is the daughter of the John Smith household, and then next thing you know, she is the cousin or she is the, let's just keep daughter, she's the cousin of now the Ivory household, you have now confused your plot lines and character development. You have made this single character the daughter of two separate households. And that's just something that can't happen within stories, because anybody that pays attention or is an avid reader is going to catch on to that detail and not want to continue the story, because you as the author didn't even care enough to keep your story progression flowing in a good manner and a important manner. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but that's the way I kind of think about it. So I want to make sure that I have all the characters and what the characters do and who the characters are in a concise platform, in one platform that I can look at and then tell you exactly what they do as far as that plan goes. And then, as you see in red here, was kind of how I wanted to continue this chapter and end the chapter. And before I get into that, I guess I'll start by saying I think I need to finish the description of Isabel. Obviously, I only have this first part. In my last novel stream, I talked about how typical dress wear or clothing wear in medieval times were for daughters or for women or for, all of that goes. How did people dress was basically the topic I went over. So I think I need to describe how they dressed in medieval times and how Isabel particularly dressed in medieval times in relating to the detail, because keeping it historical is something I think is very important. I don't necessarily want it to be so high fantasy and make up extra dress wear that has a special, cross axe, whatever, and when they show that to the demon goes away. I'm not making that sort of novel. I want to more keep it historically accurate, but still have some components that I've made up or made it more of a fantasy story, but still have it set in a time period that historically existed through the medieval times. So I kind of need to describe that. Then I'm going to go on and describe the mother of the household and potentially the brother to Leo Smith in the household. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to have him later on as I continue this story, like later on when I'm several chapters deep. Having a brother to Leo might make more sense just for story progression, more characters involved, more people you might have an interest in, other things about how that relates to it. But as of now, I think I'm just going to have those four characters, including the father, to the story. So, as you see with my first bullet point here, I have described the poor by describing the houses in vivid detail. So I've kind of already done that as far as the first story progression goes, but that was a description of the John Smith household. I think I need to make sure I describe the average household of this village to this castle, because it's important to not just set the story with what you necessarily visualized it with through the perfect household or the representation of the guy who was the biggest part of the household, the biggest part of the village, the people the village looked up to. The peasants looked up to the John Smith household and to what the house was and to what the house represented, to what the people represented. The John Smiths were the people of this peasant community, but I think it's also important to describe what the average person of this community looked like through their house or through the description of an average peasant folk to this village. Once I do that, I was then going to compare it to the rich, and that is going up into the castle walls and up into the highest towers. I want to compare the people who are the most rich, that being Sir William, Sir Jester, the king, the queen, the handmaidens, all these sort of people that live within the castle walls. Not just live within the community like blacksmiths or whatever else, but physically live within these high towers and within the castle walls, the highest of the highest people. So after I described that, I was then going to mention Catherine by name, but not shown. And the reason I kind of want to do that was I don't want to necessarily in chapter 1 tell you off the bat who these characters are talking about, but I want to highly imply, if you read the prologue, who these characters are talking about. because Catherine, I want to be someone that is very mischievous, very planned, very smart character, knows exactly what they're doing and who they are talking about, and going on from that point forward. So having a character like that, I think I can best compare to Littlefinger of the Game of Thrones, because Littlefinger was somebody that was very mischievous, very planning, very cunning, somebody that knew exactly what he wanted to do and how he was going to do it, somebody that is very smart. I want Catherine to be that same sort of character. Now I was going to introduce Sir William and Sir Jester. Sir William being the head of the Queen's Guard, and Sir Jester being the head of the defense plan. So, introducing these two characters are pivotal to the story. Sir William being the head of the King's Guard and Sir Jester. Sir Jester is very important because Sir Jester was the one that came in and figured out that Catherine had somebody within her premises. And therefore, Catherine got beat up off the screen and blah, 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 and went on from that point forward. And then you obviously have, I guess we'll say here, that I want to describe not just the position of who the head of Queen's Guard might have been, looked like, and blah, 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 but I also wanted to describe Sir Jester being the head of the defense. I wanted Sir Jester to be immediately introduced as somebody that takes his role extremely important, somebody that, as the head of defense, is taking not just a role so purposely, but actually pursuing being the head of defense every day. In other words, he is a character that I want to introduce, talking about the defense of the castle and how he wants to have their defense plan being. So right from the bat, you know who this character is, he takes his job serious, and what his job is. So Sir Jester is very much going to be one of those characters I have in my story. The next thing, and how I'm thinking of ending the chapter, is by having the character of Catherine walking through the dungeons. I think this is a very good way to keep the character kind of mischievous, and you don't necessarily know her plan, her great plan, or even her smaller plan within this first chapter for how she is going to go about this story. Again, keeping her kind of mysterious. You don't exactly know if she is a good guy, a bad guy, or just fully moderate and in between. Now, I don't think the moderate and in-between option is going to really work for Catherine, because I think a lot of people are either going to view her as a adversary to the Empire, or as somebody that's more kind of cunning, but still working under the Empire or for the Empire, or however you want to say from that point. So, if I decide to have her walking through the dungeon, I think that's a good way to kind of keep the feeling mischievous. Now, I don't know if that's going to be kind of cheesy. It's like I don't want the story when somebody reads it to look at it and say, you know, that's kind of cheesy. I don't really want that for my story. So I think the best way to keep it not being like kind of cliche or cheesy or whatever kind of word you want to use for that is by making sure that I have the viewers or how I describe the situation in a way that keeps it interesting and keeps you involved in the story. So basically, by description and how I plan out the story, I don't think that the story is going to be cheesy. So I think that's going to be very important. We're going to quickly introduce you to kind of some of the research that I've been planning for the story. And this is, I talked about in several other streams. I'll take a quick drink and then we'll continue on here. Alrighty. So, I want to have it set after the fall of Rome. And I'm having the castle that I'm first starting to describe be Dover Castle. As I said in some of the other streams before, I want my castles to be based off of historical castles that have existed. So basically, I want my castles to represent a castle that actually exists or has existed. Because some of these castles have been torn down and whatnot, but have been historically documented. And so the first castle that I want to describe is the Dover Castle, and that castle has a very strategic advantage to it, and that's why the seal of the household that it got described in the prologue of the story had a ship and whatever else, because Dover Castle is on top of this hill that overlooks the ocean around it. It is a very strategic location that is one point of entry to the castle. So if you want to set up your empire and have a major empire, a Dover Castle type of empire would be huge within the involvement. So Dover Castle was the first thing. Then I went on to talk about the peasantry of how people lived in medieval times. And having the influence of the church is going to be something that is going to be highly important from my story in the advantage of the story. That's something that I want to take into account for sure. And I don't have a part for the Catholic Church or for a church if I decide to just make it not Catholic for whatever reason. I'm not sure on that yet because I haven't gotten there. But long story short, having the church influence is going to be historically relevant because it is what happened in the medieval times too. So again, I want to keep that element as part of the story. But as you also see here, this is a description or an image that I screenshotted that overlooked kind of a basic outline of what a castle would look like. So I have done some research as far as explaining what the castle looks like, and I'm going to have to go back and add a lot more details to keep the description vivid and the description you read and kind of want to learn more about or have a description in your mind, something that you can fully visualize without having to kind of make up your own ideas. Now, obviously, when you have a description on print, and that's kind of what I was explaining earlier, even if you are super good at describing what it looks like, you're going to have people come up with their own description of what it looks like, their own idea. I think of the classic example of a cup. If you put a cup in the room, the same cup, and have people draw that cup, or describe the cup, even if you're not in an art class, but just simply describe the cup. People are going to describe the cup and what the cup looks like differently, despite it being the same physical cup. So that's kind of the basic concept as far as that outline goes. But it brings me to my next component and what I was talking about earlyhand. So one of the biggest reasons to my challenge as far as writing goes is simply the idea of writing anxiety or just trying to get something out and get something important. So I thought I was just going to share this video. For one, I'm wanting to make sure I test the OBS and making sure that you can hear it and not just I can hear it. Because before I tried to do this with the interview on Discord, I was able to hear it perfectly fine. Yet the people on YouTube and whatever else couldn't hear it at all. So I want to make sure that I have that system fixed. And I think that it has been fixed. So that is one purpose for showing this video. But I also kind of wanted to discuss my ideas for being a lot more consistent. And then we'll go to the next component. And then we'll get into some actually writing for the story.
A common source of anxiety for writers is not knowing how to precisely put their idea.
I want to make sure that the volume is good. Those who are still on YouTube, Ron Helton or Jimmy or Daily Blend on Twitch, I want to make sure that the volume is good for you. And hello, EFSUI38883. I don't know how you pronounce your name, but thank you very much for your comment on DLive.
Ideas from their head onto paper. This is more common for new writers because it's a skill that has to be cultivated. We've all been there. Inspiration strikes, you run to your computer, you write, and then you read it, and it's not that good.
In my head, I thought that was really cool.
First of all, I hope you know that you are not alone in this. It even happens to experienced writers. Ideas and emotions can be hard to transcribe, and the skill to precisely convey what's happening up here can take years to cultivate. This is something that comes with a lot of time and practice, and is the reason that every famous author's main piece of advice isn't write from different perspectives or use a Pomodoro timer. The advice they always give is read and write. a lot. You need to shift how you see yourself.
So that's an interesting component when I first watched this video, because as I described at the very beginning of this stream, this is a creator from the Campfire program that I am a part of, and he makes these videos, and I think that these videos are very good, so I suggest watching them, even if you're not necessarily a writer, but maybe someone that's interested in writing in the future or whatnot. But as somebody that is trying to write and not necessarily someone that's super good at writing itself, I do think that he brings up a very good point. Although you are not necessarily that skilled, as you can kind of think of it as a sport component. When you play a sport, the only way to physically get better at the sport or whatever else is to practice. Practice makes perfect is, a common phrase you'll hear within the sports community or any community for that matter, because it can be anything, that the more you practice it, the more you get better at it, and the more you get perfect. And I don't think the true perfect ever gets reached, but as the phrase still makes sense, and I think we all understand it. So I think by simply writing more and not being afraid to write is something that I need to get more through my mind and in my mind to be able to not be afraid to write. Because as I've said, I kind of struggle sometimes to have the idea of writing, or to have the idea of my story, to get involved in a story, to start writing, and get bogged down so much in the details that I cut myself off short, and it just gets kind of bad. It doesn't make sense to me. I get annoyed and whatever else. I think I need to kind of not necessarily take a full carefree idea to writing, but simply just write and then wait a couple days and read over what I wrote and change it if I think it's necessary, but not getting so bogged down in the details that it becomes a problem.
You are not a writer. You're a student. I'm a student. We are all students and will remain so until the bitter end. You need to write as much as possible to learn the fundamentals. That way, when the ideas come to you, you can perform alchemy on the page and turn emotions into words. But even with all of that practice and experience, I don't think any professional writer would call their first draft perfect. A lot of magic happens in the edit, and we tend to be hypercritical of ourselves. If you frequently find yourself going back to read your work, feeling bad about the art you've created, and scrapping it all together, it might be good to get into the habit of not reading your work until it's finished. That way, even if it's bad, you'll come out with more experience than you had before, and you will have learned from it. It's better to write 50,000 words that aren't perfect than it is to not write at all.
So that's kind of the big point, and I kind of described that whole situation a little bit already. I don't think we need to get too bogged down on the details exactly what he said there, but it all makes sense. Now, this next part he talks about is getting feedback, and feedback is very important. And oftentimes, as someone that's kind of struggled to write and have many hours with my mom or many hours with my tutor for writing, trying to figure out exactly what I was trying to say on this paragraph, or exactly what I was trying to mean on this one, or this doesn't make sense, can you explain it to me? And it makes perfect sense in my head. All of those elements. It becomes very annoying sometimes to write, and writing can get that way, and it's something that I think needs to be discussed as far as making the idea of writing not be a challenge, but rather getting better at it. I think changing the way you look at yourself when you write and the way you get your feedback is something that is important to me, because recently, and this is real recent, only like 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, okay, instead of looking at feedback and it being a bad thing, I need to look at feedback and it be more of a better idea or a better component to actually getting better. So instead of seeing like, oh, they're critiquing your work because you're bad, you're terrible at writing, this is why they're critiquing your work, is to take an approach of not that they're critiquing your work because it's bad, but they're critiquing your work because you can change these few things to make your story better. You can change these few things to make what you write that much better. And if you make those small changes, the overall content of what happens becomes very, very good, becomes much better.
While feedback is one of the best ways to master the fundamentals, it also helps you deal with another form of writing anxiety. the fear of sharing. Like I said before, writing is personal. It takes what's happening up here and makes it free for everyone out there, and that is incredibly vulnerable. When someone judges your writing, it feels like they're judging you, and that fear can be paralyzing. Even for me. I shared the scripts for all of these videos with other people here at the company. It's always hard to hit that share button, but it's gotten easier with time. Finding a group of people that you trust to share your work with will help you work through your fear of sharing your work. You'll start to expect what kind of feedback you'll get from the different people. I know Jackson will tell me what jokes work and which ones don't, and I know Jason will dig up every tiny grammar mistake. I know what I'm gonna get before I get it, and that makes me less anxious. Now it's easier to share my writing with other people because once you share so much stuff, you get used to the feeling of sharing. You become less protective about the things that you write and take criticism less personally.
So finding a group of readers or a group of people to look over your work is an interesting idea. I don't know if everybody necessarily has the option of having a group. Now, everybody has a couple of friends, but as I was kind of talking about beforehand, I don't know if you necessarily want to share your story or what you write with a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of friends. Because a lot of times you don't want to feel like you're necessarily getting judged. But oftentimes you kind of have to take the opposite approach. You have to put yourself in the friend's position. If they're willing to look over your work and give you feedback, they probably think you're really skilled. Even if your writing isn't super good or very impressive to them, they'll still think that what you're doing is pretty cool and something that they want to do, maybe not do themselves, but they'll have a positive idea of who you are by simply challenging yourself to actually write and get feedback from them. As a person, as that friend, they'll probably say, oh, you're actually trying to do something. You're actually trying to get better at a craft that they might not even have interest in. And you could take that for any position. You'll oftentimes get asked to judge something from another friend that you may not even be super passionate about, but you still do it to help the person out or to help the friend out. But the pure act of not necessarily making yourself feel like you're getting super judged is very important. So he goes on to talk about a little more things that I think are very important. And this next one is about finding the flow. And I wasn't necessarily going to show that. But if you're interested in what he has to say, I highly suggest you checking out this video on the Campfire Technologies YouTube page. But I was going to go to this next video and kind of share some ideas for writing better dialogue. Because we all know that dialogue is very important when it comes to actually writing scenes and writing a story that is super engaging to the community. In other words, if you have bad dialogue or not the best sort of type of dialogue, you are going to get the story closed, or people aren't going to be interested in your story enough to look back on it with any perspective. Long story short, if you don't have good dialogue or engaging dialogue, people are not going to want to read your story.
Speak differently. But those differences aren't in just what they say, but in how they say it. From the most obvious of accents to simple body language. That's one reason why dialogue is such a powerful tool in fiction. It lets you show your characters to the audience instead of just describing them. They can say where they're from, what their backgrounds are, their education, if they're comfortable in a situation, or so many other things. It can draw readers into a scene and make your story so much more fun to read. Or it can be stiff and awkward and pull readers out of a story. That's why we want our dialogue to be top notch. So here are 9 tips for creating better dialogue. First, let's start with a simple one. Don't pile on distracting dialogue tags, such as he whined, she commanded, or they queried, which draw attention to themselves. The old standbys, said, told, and asked are less noticeable and let readers focus on your character's words. You can throw in some of the more complex ones occasionally, but they don't add as much depth as some of the other things we're going to talk about in this list.
So his idea here about super complex sort of dialogue phrases isn't something that I necessarily was super aware of. So I don't know if I necessarily fell into this trap when I was writing a story, but I can see how people who are really trying to write good dialogue and putting a ton of effort into it, think by using these words they might get better dialogue or better results because they seem a little bit more fancier or might engage your audience more because you're using bigger words, essentially. People sometimes get impressed with vocabulary, especially if you're a reader or a writer. Having good vocabulary, better word choice and everything is very important. So by him saying to not use these kind of super fancy words for writing dialogue and for word choice is something that is very important. So we'll go on and continue here.
Also, a case to be made for occasionally abandoning dialogue tags. If two characters are talking back and forth, it's pretty clear who's speaking when. In this case, the dialogue tags become filler words that don't really add anything to the story. Cutting some of the dialogue tags can help pick up the pacing of the scene and remove words that don't add any clarity. Give each of your characters a unique voice inside of your head as you write their dialogue. Their unique voices will come from a variety of different factors, such as their age, their personality, their education, or their relationship with the people they're talking to. This is one of the fundamental tools when it comes to making great dialogue, and you can really see when it's done well and when it's done poorly. Let's take a look at this clip from The Witcher. First, a man tells Geralt,
"She gave us a message to pass on to you. You have to choose the lesser evil."
He doesn't seem particularly aggressive, but he speaks sternly and seems confident. But then the next man says,
"It's an ultimatum. Get it?"
This takes the first man's line and kind of rewords it to add clarity to the scene and also characterize this man who is speaking. He's gruffer than the first man, more blunt. Then there's a pause to show Geralt's contemplation of what to do in the scene. And pauses are very important for dialogue, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
Fun.
Here, the Witcher has made the decision to fight, and we can see that he's not happy about it. And by the way that he approaches the men, we can see that he is not scared of them. Moments later, we see why. Which is great. There are some good things happening in that scene, but if we look a little bit closer, would some random hired idiot in medieval times say the word
Ultimatum.
It's up for debate, but I think not. It actually sounds pretty silly to hear it come out of his mouth. All I heard was this.
"I'm giving you an ultimatum," meaning that you give me the whole tomato or else.
The audience needs to understand what's happening in a scene so I can see what they were going for, but characters still need to speak in a way that makes sense for their background. Most people in the Middle Ages were illiterate, so ultimatum seems unlikely. We can also learn a great deal about a character by the kind of...
So the fact that he's also talking about medieval times is something that is rather important for the whole story and component for that and how story progression goes, because he's mentioning that you still need to have dialogue that speaks to the actual time period. So I'm going to play this next part and we'll continue on here.
Slang that they use. Imagine a character who unironically says things like YOLO and swag. You immediately can see the person I'm talking about, and I only used 2 words. The key to giving your character a distinct voice is understanding who they are, their background, their personality. Get in touch with your characters, and you'll be able to hear what they say and how they say it. Know when to summarize. If your character talks for an hour about their golf technique, you can't include the entire speech in your story, unless it is absolutely important for your audience to know how to hit a hole-in-one with a 9-iron. Instead, you can summarize. John went on for an hour about his golf technique. It's not always clear when you should summarize. Personally, I tend to overwrite.
I'm going to test this real quick.
A 9-iron. Instead, you can summarize. John went on for an hour about his golf technique. It's not always clear.
Alrighty, so it looks like your audio is working for videos and you can hear me and all that for YouTube, Twitch, and DLive and through OBS. That was one thing I was wanting to test with this live stream here. So we're looking good, but I'll continue on this video. I just wanted to make sure that that was working because I don't see anybody through comment section saying that they couldn't hear it. So I thought it was working. I just wanted to make sure and test it for myself.
Dialogue. It's easier to cut something out while you're editing than it is to add extra dialogue if it feels too sparse. That doesn't mean we should always summarize though, which leads us to our next tip. You can mix a couple of lines of dialogue into your summary to give it the flavor of what your characters actually sound like. Been working on my swing, John said, launching into an hour-long discourse on his golf technique. Mixing this two still gives you the opportunity to show how your character is unique, like in tip number 2, but also spares your audience a bunch of boring dialogue, like in tip number 3. In real life, only like 20% of the stuff we say is actually important anyway. All the rest of it is just filler words like, or talking about the League of Legends meta. Mixing dialogue and summary can show how your characters are people who go on rants and small talk, while sparing your audience the boring details. Often, people don't express what's exactly on their minds. Instead, they hint at it in other ways. If John is attracted to Marcia, he might not come out and say to her, "I'm attracted to you." That could be weird. Instead, he might become boastful around her or steer the conversation to find out if she's in a relationship.
So the idea of interaction or using different dialogues that interact with each other through trying to like undermine the person is a very important idea to dialogue, because essentially through dialogue you're just trying to make your story more compelling, more interesting to the reader. You want your dialogue to feel natural. People don't always do something that they would do in a story. A lot of times through writing and through story making, you write the story and you as if the story is super stiff. You have progression, you have people talking to each other super stiff, like not very natural. It's not very flowing, it's not very personable. It's just a lot of like, he said this, she said this, he said that, she said this. And if you don't do that right and you don't add vivid descriptions to it, the whole story idea and the whole story making can become very boring to the reader, and the reader won't want to watch that or listen to that anymore, and your story will then be closed. And when you're a person that wants to write a story or a person that wants to write anything, you want your information to be compelling. And so the idea of dialogue, especially in story making, is very important to keep the reader engaged. And he goes on to talk about a few more writing tips for dialogue, but I just kind of wanted to end it there and kind of introduce him to you, make sure the audio was working in OBS, and you got that first problem fixed. Thank you for letting me know. Daily Blend on Twitch and Ron on YouTube. I highly appreciate that. But I just thought I would kind of briefly discuss what I was going to write about next, and then we'll kind of end the stream, because I mainly just wanted to update you and test OBS and make sure the audio was working for videos and mic. And we had some problems at the beginning. Again, thank you, Ron and Daily Blend, for letting me know. I highly appreciate that. But I was just going to quickly describe Isabel and the mother, and then I was going to go on and describe the poor. And I might be doing an update next week. If not, it'll probably be at least once a month. So it'll be sometime in December where I update you again as far as what I've done on the Trials of Rome book idea. I highly appreciate you. And again, I'm just going to make a quick shout out. Make sure to follow me on my Discord. That should be, actually I didn't put it in the description. I'll make sure once this ends that I update the description, and it'll be in the description there. But I'm also doing a live stream on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, for the election. I'm probably going to be starting around 4, maybe 3 at the earliest Central Time. And go from there and just kind of discuss what I think, how the election's going to go, look at some results, some early predictions, and whatever else. It should be very fun. I have several guests lined up, and that's partly why I wanted to do this stream, as I've said before. If you want to be one of those guests, you can follow my Discord or my Twitter and contact me through that way, and I'll highly welcome you as part of my stream for Tuesday. I hope to see you there, and thank you for watching. And make sure you follow freedomscoop.com, where you can find other content creators like Ed, The Generational Gap, The R-Rated Conservative, The Freckles and Brit Show, and Steven Ingaramus and others. They are very good independent streamers and content creators that I think you would highly like. Thank you for watching, and catch you next time.